For 7 years, I'd been invisible. The woman who fixed the guns while heroes made history with them. I liked it that way. Then Captain Cole Brennan walked into my workshop and asked me one question, and invisible became impossible. The fluorescent lights hummed above my workbench, casting their familiar white glow across the rows of weapons that lined the walls of my workshop at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. My hands moved with the kind of precision that comes from 7 years of doing the same thing, day after day, until your fingers know every curve and mechanism without your brain having to tell them what to do. I was cleaning a Barrett M82 sniper rifle, 50 caliber, the kind of weapon that could punch through an engine block from a mile away, the kind of weapon that required respect, not just skill. The barrel gleamed under my work light as I ran the cleaning rod through it one more time, checking for any residue I might have missed. Outside, Fort Campbell buzzed with its usual afternoon rhythm, boots hitting pavement as soldiers jogged past in formation, the distant thump of helicopters taking off and landing, voices calling out commands. But inside my workshop, there was only the quiet, the smell of gun oil and metal shavings, the soft click of parts being assembled and disassembled. This was my world, and I built it carefully over the years to be exactly what I needed. No complications, no drama, just me and the weapons that required my attention. My name is Josephine Whitaker, though everyone calls me Joe. I'm 29 years old, though people usually think I'm younger. My blonde hair is always pulled back in a practical ponytail. I wear the same thing every day: gray work shirt, dark cargo pants, steel-toed boots, no makeup, no jewelry except for the watch my father gave me before he died. There's no point in vanity when you spend your days covered in gun residue and machine grease. I'd stumbled into this career almost by accident. After my parents died in a car crash when I was 23, I drifted for a while, not sure what to do with myself. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and a technical degree I'd earned because I was good with my hands and liked understanding how things worked. I'd applied for a job at a civilian gun shop in Clarksville, and the owner, an old veteran named Hank Sullivan, had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. Hank taught me everything about firearms maintenance and repair. More than that, he taught me to respect the weapons, to understand that every gun that crossed my bench was someone's life insurance policy downrange. When he died of a heart attack 3 years into my apprenticeship, he'd left a recommendation letter with his lawyer. One call to Fort Campbell, and I had a job as a civilian contractor in the armory. The pay was good, the work was steady, and most importantly, people left me alone. The door to my workshop opened, letting in a blast of hot Kentucky air. I didn't look up. Soldiers came and went all day, dropping off weapons for maintenance or picking up ones I'd finished. I heard boots on the concrete floor, heavy boots. Someone tall, walking with the kind of confidence that came from years of training. I continued working, using a small brush to clean the trigger assembly. The Barrett was almost done. Just needed to reassemble the bolt carrier group and run a function check. "Ms. Whitaker?" The voice was male, smooth, with the kind of authority that made you pay attention whether you wanted to or not. I set down my tools and finally looked up. The man standing in front of my bench was probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent a lot of time in dangerous places. He wore standard combat fatigues, but I noticed the Special Forces patch on his sleeve. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and intense gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Mid-30s, I guessed. The kind of officer who'd earned his rank through action, not politics. "Can I help you?" I kept my voice neutral. He studied me for a moment, as if deciding something. Then he pulled up one of the metal stools and sat down across from my workbench. This was unusual. Most soldiers stood, said what they needed, and left. No one ever sat down in my workshop. No one ever treated it like a place for conversation. "My name is Captain Cole Brennan," he said. "Special Operations. I've been asking around about the best firearms technician on this base. 3 different people gave me your name." "I do my job," I said simply. "I'm sure you do." He leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes locked on mine. I need to ask you about something specific, something that might sound crazy. I felt a small flicker of curiosity. In 7 years, I thought I'd heard every possible question about guns. Go ahead. Brennan seemed to choose his words carefully. I need to know if it's physically possible to make a confirmed kill shot at 3,800 meters. I blinked, set down the trigger assembly I'd been holding. 3,800 meters. That was over 2 miles. It was an absurd distance for a rifle shot. That's impossible, I said immediately. Is it, though? Brennan's eyes never left mine. I'm not asking if it's easy. I'm not asking if it's probable. I'm asking if it's possible. If every condition was perfect, if the shooter was skilled enough, if the weapon was calibrated exactly right, could it be done? My mind was already working through the mathematics. Bullet drop at that distance would be measured in dozens of feet, not inches. Wind drift would push the round off target by yards, if there was even a slight breeze. The Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation would affect the trajectory. Air density, temperature, altitude, all of it would matter. At that distance, a bullet would be in flight for several seconds. The target would have time to move. A bird flying through the bullet's path could deflect it. Why are you asking me this? I said. Brennan hesitated. Because someone claims they made that shot, and I need to know if they're telling the truth or if they're full of it. Who made this claim? I can't tell you that, not yet. I picked up a cleaning cloth and wiped my hands, thinking. The current world record for a confirmed sniper kill was around 3,500 meters, achieved by a Canadian Special Forces sniper in Iraq. I'd read about it in a military journal. The shot had required incredible skill, perfect weather conditions, and a significant amount of luck. But 3,800 meters? That was 300 meters farther. Every additional meter exponentially increased the difficulty. The longest confirmed kill shot on record is about 3,500 meters, I said. That was done with a Macmillan TAC-50 rifle firing 50 caliber rounds. The bullet was in the air for over 10 seconds. At 3,800 meters, you're adding another few seconds of flight time. Every fraction of a second increases the variables exponentially. Brennan listened intently. But you're not saying it's impossible. I'm saying the physics become extremely difficult at that range. You're not just fighting gravity and wind. The Earth's rotation affects the bullet's trajectory. The air pressure at your location matters. The temperature matters. The altitude matters. A 1-degree difference in temperature can change your point of impact by several inches. What about the rifle itself? Brennan asked. I considered. You'd need a 50 caliber rifle minimum, something like a Barrett M82 or a Macmillan TAC-50. The rounds would need to be match-grade ammunition, not standard military issue. Every bullet would need to be nearly identical in weight and shape. And the scope, you'd need the best military-grade optics available, something that can hold zero at extreme distances. Even then, at 3,800 meters, you're not really seeing your target clearly. You're seeing a heat shimmer or a shadow. Brennan nodded slowly. What about the shooter? I met his eyes. The shooter would need to be exceptional, world-class. They would need to understand windage, elevation, and about a dozen other factors that most people don't even know exist. They would need steady hands, perfect breathing control, and the patience to wait for the exact right moment. You sound like you know a lot about long-range shooting, Brennan observed. I know about the weapons. I know about the mechanics. That's my job. Have you ever fired at that distance? I shook my head. I'm a technician, not a sniper. I fix the guns. Other people shoot them. Brennan stood up from the stool. He seemed satisfied with my answers, though I wasn't sure what he'd been looking for. Thank you for your time, Ms. Whitaker. You've been helpful. Captain Brennan, I said before he could leave. Why does this matter so much? Why do you need to know if this shot was possible? He turned back to look at me. For a moment, I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or worry. Because if someone really made that shot, he said quietly, then we need to find them. Either they're the most skilled marksman alive, or they're lying about something very important. Either way, I need to know the truth. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back one more time. If you think of anything else about this, anything at all, come find me. I'm in Building 7. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in my workshop with my tools and my thoughts. I looked down at the Barrett parts spread across my bench. 3,800 meters. The number kept running through my mind. I had told Brennan the truth. Such a shot was theoretically possible, but theory and reality were very different things. I picked up my tools and went back to work, but my concentration was broken. I kept thinking about that impossible distance, about the person who claimed to have made the shot, and about why a special forces captain would come to me for answers. I'd spent 7 years avoiding complications, keeping my head down, doing my job. But something told me that my quiet life was about to get a lot more interesting. That evening, after my shift ended, I did something I rarely did. Instead of heading straight to my small apartment on the edge of the base, I went to the base library. It was a modest building near the administrative offices, mostly used by soldiers studying for promotion exams or researching military history. I'd been there maybe 3 times in 7 years. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, looked surprised to see me. "Miss Whitaker, isn't it? From the armory?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for information on long-range shooting records, military journals, maybe some sniper manuals if you have them." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't ask questions. She led me to a section in the back where military publications were kept. These are all unclassified materials, of course. The classified stuff is kept elsewhere, but there's plenty here about marksmanship and shooting techniques. I spent 2 hours reading. I found the article about the Canadian sniper who'd made the 3,500-meter shot. I read about the British sniper who'd held the previous record at 2,400 meters. I studied ballistics charts and wind reading techniques. The more I read, the more convinced I became that a 3,800-meter shot would require not just skill, but near-perfect conditions and an element of luck that couldn't be controlled. When I finally left the library, the sun was setting. The base was quieter now, with most soldiers either in the mess hall or their barracks. I walked slowly back to my apartment, my mind still turning through calculations. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom unit that was standard military housing. Basic but functional furniture. Bare walls except for a calendar and a single photograph of my parents, taken a year before they died. I had no siblings, no close relatives. My work was my life, and I'd been content with that. I heated up some leftover chicken and rice for dinner, eating mechanically while staring at my laptop screen. I'd opened a ballistics calculator program, inputting numbers: wind speed, bullet weight, muzzle velocity, air temperature, altitude. At 3,800 meters, even a 5-mile-per-hour wind would push a bullet several feet off target. The shooter would need to compensate for that, plus the bullet drop, plus the Coriolis effect. I was so absorbed in my calculations that I almost didn't hear the knock on my door. When it came again, louder this time, I got up and looked through the peephole. Captain Brennan was standing outside. I opened the door, surprised. "Captain, how did you know where I live?" "I asked around," he said. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." I hesitated, then stepped aside. Brennan entered, his eyes quickly scanning my small apartment. He noticed the laptop on the table, the ballistics program still open on the screen. "You've been researching," he observed. "I was curious," I admitted. "Your question this afternoon got me thinking. I wanted to understand if what you described was even remotely possible." Brennan sat down at my small kitchen table without being invited. There was something different about him now, less formal than he'd been in my workshop. He looked tired, like he'd been up for many hours. "I need to be honest with you about something," he said. "The reason I came to your workshop today wasn't random. I've been watching you work for the past 3 weeks. I felt a chill run down my spine. Watching me? Why? Because we're investigating something, and your name came up in connection with it," he added quickly, seeing the alarm on my face. "Not as a suspect, but as someone who might have information without realizing it." "I don't understand." Brennan leaned forward, his voice low and serious. 6 months ago, during a classified operation in Syria, someone made an impossible shot. They took out a high-value target from a distance that shouldn't have been possible. The shot saved American lives. But here's the problem. We don't know who made it. I sat down across from him, my heart beating faster. "How can you not know? Don't you track your own snipers?" "This shot didn't come from any of our official sniper positions. It came from somewhere else entirely, from a location we hadn't secured. After the operation, we searched the area. We found a rifle, a Barrett M82, but it had been wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Whoever made that shot disappeared like a ghost." "And you think the shot was from 3,800 meters?" "We've done the calculations based on where the rifle was found and where the target was located. 3,800 meters, give or take 50 meters. It's the longest confirmed kill shot ever made, and we have no idea who made it." My mind was racing. But why come to me? I fix guns. I don't shoot them at that distance. Brennan pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. It showed the Barrett rifle that had been found. I picked it up, studying it carefully. Even in the photograph, I could see certain details. The scope was a Schmidt and Bender, top of the line. The bipod had been customized, and there were small scratches on the receiver that looked like tool marks. "Do you recognize anything about this weapon?" Brennan asked. I looked closer. There was something familiar about those tool marks. I'd seen similar scratches before, the kind left by a specific type of armorer's wrench that I used in my workshop. But thousands of technicians use similar tools. "I'm not sure," I said carefully. "Look at the scope mounting," Brennan said. "The way it's been fitted." I examined the photograph more closely. The scope had been mounted with extreme precision. The rings were perfectly aligned, and there was a thin strip of what looked like rubber padding between the scope and the mounting surface. This was a technique I used myself to prevent vibration and maintain zero calibration. Hank Sullivan had taught it to me. He'd learned it from an old gunsmith who'd served in Korea. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unique either. "Someone who really knew what they were doing worked on this rifle," I said slowly. "The mounting is professional grade. Better than professional, actually." "We had our own armorers look at it," Brennan said. "They said the same thing. They also said the technique used for mounting that scope is similar to the way you mount scopes in your workshop." I set down the photograph, feeling defensive. "I'm not the only person who uses that technique. It's standard practice for precision work." "You're right, but here's what makes you interesting to us." Brennan pulled out a tablet and brought up a maintenance log. 7 months ago, that same Barrett rifle passed through your workshop for maintenance. We have the records. I thought back. I worked on dozens of weapons every week, hundreds every month. I maintain every Barrett on this base. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe not, but here's what's interesting. 7 months ago, right before someone went AWOL, that rifle was signed out of the armory. Brennan showed me a checkout form. The signature was illegible, just a scrawl. The person who took it never brought it back. 1 month later, that person disappeared from the military entirely. 6 months after that, the rifle showed up in Syria after being used to make an impossible shot. I stood up, feeling suddenly angry. "Are you accusing me of stealing a rifle and somehow ending up in a combat zone? I'm a civilian contractor. I don't have clearance for operations. I don't have training for that kind of mission. I've never even left this base except to go home." Brennan held up his hands. "I'm not accusing you of anything, but I am asking if you noticed anything unusual about that rifle when you worked on it. Did anyone show particular interest in it? Did anyone ask you specific questions about long-range accuracy?" I forced myself to calm down and think. I walked over to my small kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, taking a long drink. Brennan waited patiently. I remember that rifle, I said finally. It came to me because the scope was losing zero. The shooter who'd been using it complained that his point of impact was shifting. I checked everything: the scope, the mounting, the barrel bedding. I found a hairline crack in one of the scope rings. I replaced it and recalibrated the entire system. Did you test fire it? Brennan asked. No, I don't test fire rifles. I fix them and send them back. The shooters test them on the range. Did anyone else work on it besides you? I thought carefully. No, I worked on it alone over 2 days. When I finished, I logged it back into the system and left it in the secured storage area for pickup. Brennan nodded, making mental notes. What happened after that? Who picked it up? I don't know. Once I finish working on a weapon, it goes back into general storage. Whoever checked it out would have dealt with the main armory desk, not me. And you didn't notice anything else unusual? No one hanging around your workshop more than normal? No one asking detailed questions about ballistics or long-range shooting? I started to shake my head, then paused. There had been someone, a soldier I'd never seen before, who had come into my workshop about a week after I finished working on that Barrett. He'd asked me technical questions about wind drift calculations and bullet drop at extreme ranges. I'd thought it was just professional curiosity at the time. A lot of soldiers asked me technical questions. It was part of my job to educate them about their weapons. There was someone, I said slowly. I don't know his name. He was young, maybe 25 or 26. Average height, athletic build. He had a tattoo on his left forearm, I remember that. Some kind of compass design. Brennan's expression sharpened with interest. What did he ask you? He wanted to know how to calculate wind drift at distances over 3,000 meters. He asked about the Coriolis effect and how much it would impact a shot. He seemed very knowledgeable already, like he was confirming information rather than learning it for the first time. Brennan pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. This compass tattoo, can you describe it in more detail? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. It was detailed work, professional, not the kind of rough tattoo some soldiers get overseas. The compass rose had intricate shading, Celtic-style knotwork around the edges. It covered most of his forearm. Anything else? His face? His mannerisms? He had an angular jawline. His nose looked like it had been broken at least once, slightly crooked. Brown eyes, set a bit closer together than usual. He favored his left hand when he gestured, and he had a slight limp, like an old injury in his right leg. Brennan was still typing. You have a good memory for details, Miss Whitaker. I work with precision instruments, Captain. Details matter. Brennan finished typing and looked up at me. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Are you willing to help us identify this person? Formally? I sat back down at the table. What does that mean? Tomorrow morning, I'd like you to work with a sketch artist. Describe this soldier in as much detail as you can remember. We'll run the sketch through our databases, see if we can match it with anyone who had access to that rifle or information about the Syria operation. And if you find him, what then? Then we ask him some very pointed questions about where he was 6 months ago and what he knows about an impossible shot. I looked at the photograph of the Barrett rifle still lying on my table. Someone had taken that weapon, maintained it perfectly, transported it to a war zone, and used it to make a shot that defied physics. And that person had stood in my workshop, asking me technical questions, trusting that I wouldn't ask too many questions in return. Will he be in trouble? I asked. Whoever this person is? Brennan's face was unreadable. That depends on a lot of things. On why he did what he did. On whether he acted alone or had help. On what else we find when we dig deeper. You said the shot saved American lives. It did, but it also eliminated a target we needed alive for intelligence purposes. Actions have consequences, Ms. Whitaker, even when the intentions are good. I thought about my quiet life, my routine, my carefully constructed invisibility. I thought about the soldier with the compass tattoo, whoever he was, and what drove someone to make an impossible shot. And I thought about Captain Brennan, sitting in my kitchen at night, asking me to step out of the shadows and become part of something bigger. Okay, I said finally, I'll work with your sketch artist, but I want something in return. Brennan raised an eyebrow. What's that? Full transparency. If you identify this person, I want to know who he is and why he did it. I don't want to be kept in the dark. That's classified information, Ms. Whitaker. Then classify me. Give me whatever clearance I need. But if you're asking me to help you hunt someone down, I need to understand why. Brennan studied me for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Be at Building 7 tomorrow morning at 0800. We'll start then. He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Ms. Whitaker, Joe, can I call you Joe? Sure. Joe, you should know that you're about to step into something complicated. Once you're in, it'll be hard to step back out. Your quiet life might not be so quiet anymore. Are you sure you want this? I thought about the question. Was I sure? I'd spent 7 years being invisible, and it had served me well. No complications, no drama, no risks. But standing there in my small apartment, looking at that photograph of the Barrett rifle, I realized that maybe I was tired of being invisible. Maybe I wanted to matter for something more than just fixing other people's weapons. I'm sure, I said. After Brennan left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about compass tattoos and impossible shots, and the way my life seemed to be changing, whether I wanted it to or not. At some point in the early morning hours, I finally drifted off, and when my alarm went off at 6, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I arrived at Building 7 at 0745, 20 minutes early. The building was part of the Special Operations Compound, a place I'd never had reason to visit before. The guards at the entrance checked my ID twice before letting me through. Captain Brennan was waiting for me in a conference room on the second floor. With him was another man I didn't recognize. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair cut military short and sharp blue eyes that seemed to assess me in an instant. He wore civilian clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt, but something about his bearing screamed military. Ms. Whitaker, this is Agent Graham Pierce, Brennan said. He's with Army CID, Criminal Investigation Command. Pierce extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm and professional. Ms. Whitaker, thank you for coming. Captain Brennan tells me you may have spoken with a person of interest in our investigation. The soldier with the compass tattoo, I said. Exactly. I brought Corporal Davis with me. He's our sketch artist. Pierce gestured to a young man sitting at the table with a large pad of paper and an array of pencils. We'd like you to describe this soldier in as much detail as possible. For the next 2 hours, I sat with Corporal Davis, describing the man who'd come to my workshop. Davis's pencil moved across the paper, erasing and redrawing as I corrected details. The jawline needed to be more angular. The eyes needed to be closer together. The nose had a slight bump about halfway down where it had been broken. Slowly, a face emerged on the paper. It was strange, seeing someone I'd only half remembered taking shape under Davis's skilled hands. When he finally turned the pad around for me to see, I felt a chill. That's him, I said. That's as close as I can remember. Pierce took the sketch and studied it carefully. You're sure about the tattoo? A compass design on his left forearm with Celtic knotwork? Yes, it was detailed, professional work, not something done in a back alley. Pierce pulled out his phone and took a picture of the sketch. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, sending the image somewhere. We're going to run this through our databases, see if we can match it with anyone who had access to that rifle or information about the Syria operation. How long will that take? I asked. Could be minutes, could be hours. Database searches are unpredictable. Pierce sat down across from me. While we wait, Ms. Whitaker, I need you to think very carefully about your conversation with this individual. Did he say anything that seemed odd or out of place? Anything that might indicate what his plans were? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. The soldier had been polite, professional. He'd thanked me for the information about wind calculations. He'd mentioned something about wanting to be prepared for any situation. And there had been one other thing, something I'd almost forgotten. He asked me about cold bore shots, I said suddenly. He wanted to know how much the first shot from a cold barrel would differ from subsequent shots. Brennan leaned forward. A cold bore shot, that's important. Why? I asked. Pierce explained. In a combat situation, a sniper might not have time to fire warming shots. They'd have to trust that first shot from a cold barrel, which can behave differently than a warm barrel. It means he was planning for a scenario where he'd only get one chance. One shot, one kill, Brennan added quietly, from a weapon that hadn't been fired recently. The implications hung in the air. I'd helped this person, given him information that might have been used to plan an operation. The thought made me uncomfortable. I was just answering technical questions, I said defensively. People ask me stuff like that all the time. I had no idea he was planning anything. We know that, Brennan said gently. You're not responsible for what he did with the information. But you might have helped us identify him, which is huge. Pierce's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed. He showed it to Brennan, and I saw Brennan's jaw tighten. We need to take this conversation somewhere more private, Pierce said, standing up. Ms. Whitaker, would you mind coming with us to a secure briefing room? 20 minutes later, I found myself in a windowless room deeper in the building. The walls looked thick enough to block any electronic signals. There was a large table, several chairs, and nothing else. Brennan closed the door behind us with a heavy, metallic thunk that made the room feel like a vault. Pierce opened a laptop and turned it to face me. On the screen was a military personnel file with a photograph. My breath caught. It was him. The soldier with the compass tattoo, though his hair was shorter in the photo, and he was in full dress uniform. But it was definitely him. The angular jaw, the slightly crooked nose, the brown eyes set just a bit too close together. Sergeant First Class Beckett Hayes, Pierce said, age 28, member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, highly decorated sniper with 3 combat deployments. He went missing 7 months ago, exactly 2 weeks after checking out that Barrett rifle from your workshop. Missing? I looked between Pierce and Brennan. You mean he deserted? We're not sure what happened, Brennan said. Hayes was one of the best snipers in the military. He held several marksmanship records. He was scheduled to deploy with his unit, but he never showed up for the transport. His barracks room was empty. His personal belongings were gone. We've been searching for him ever since. I studied the photograph more carefully. In the picture, Hayes looked confident, capable, with the bearing of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he could do. But there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. A distance, maybe, like he was looking at something far away that no one else could see. Why would someone like him disappear? I asked. Pierce pulled up another file showing Hayes's exemplary service record before the ambush. Everything changed after his spotter was killed. The transformation was dramatic. His spotter? I asked. Brennan pulled up an after-action report on the screen. I saw the header, Enemy Contact, Multiple Casualties, Afghanistan. 12 months ago, Hayes's unit was involved in an operation that went catastrophically wrong, Brennan continued. They were providing overwatch for a convoy when the convoy was ambushed. The convoy was hit hard. 8 soldiers were killed. Pierce brought up a photograph. A young man, maybe 22 years old, with a bright smile and red hair. He was standing next to Hayes in the photo, both of them in desert camouflage, both looking exhausted but happy. Corporal Finn Gallagher, Pierce said quietly, Hayes's spotter. In sniper teams, there's always 2 people, the shooter and the spotter. The spotter does calculations, watches for wind changes, helps the shooter make adjustments. Gallagher and Hayes had worked together for 2 years. They were close friends. closer than brothers. What happened to him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He was killed in the ambush, Brennan said. Shrapnel from a mortar round. Bled out before the medevac could arrive. Hayes was with him when he died. I looked at the photograph of the two young men standing together in the desert and felt something tighten in my chest. After Gallagher died, Pierce continued, people noticed Hayes changed. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He spent hours on the range, practicing longer and longer shots. It was like he was trying to prove something to himself. Brennan brought up another file, this one showing after-action reports and intelligence summaries. Here's what's interesting. The ambush that killed Gallagher happened because of faulty intelligence. Someone provided bad information about the route being clear. The convoy walked right into a kill zone. It was a disaster. 8 soldiers died that day, including Gallagher. And you think Hayes blamed someone for it? I asked. We think he wanted answers, Pierce said, and when he didn't get them through official channels, he decided to find them himself. I was starting to understand. The target in Syria, the one Hayes allegedly shot from 3,800 meters, was that person connected to the ambush? Brennan and Pierce exchanged a glance. Finally, Brennan spoke. The target was Kareem al-Rashid, the arms dealer who'd personally brokered the weapons shipment used in Gallagher's convoy ambush. Brennan pulled up a surveillance photo showing a middle-aged man in expensive clothes. Hayes didn't just track him down. Our intelligence suggests he infiltrated al-Rashid's network, gathered information for 3 months, and calculated that shot down to the second. The bullet hit al-Rashid exactly as he stepped onto his balcony at 7:43 in the morning. 1 shot, 1 kill. Then Hayes vanished before our team even entered the compound. I stared at the photo. That's not revenge, that's surgical precision. That's what terrifies us, Pierce said quietly, because if he put that much planning into the arms dealer, imagine what he's planned for his next target. Next target? My stomach dropped. You think he's planning another shot? We're certain of it, Brennan said. The arms dealer was just one piece of the puzzle. The real problem, the person ultimately responsible for those intelligence failures that got Gallagher killed, is still out there, still unpunished. We believe Hayes is planning one more operation, one more impossible shot, and we need to stop him before he destroys what's left of his life. I looked at both of them, these men who'd pulled me out of my quiet, invisible life and thrust me into something so much larger than fixing rifles in a workshop. How am I supposed to help you find him? I asked. Brennan's answer was simple and terrifying. By letting him find you. They wanted me to be bait. The reality of it settled over me slowly as I sat in that windowless briefing room, looking at the faces of Captain Brennan and Agent Pierce. They wanted me to go back to my workshop, back to my routine, and wait for a ghost to materialize. Wait for Beckett Hayes to make contact, trusting that the woman who'd answered his technical questions once before might do it again. You'll be monitored 24/7, Pierce was saying. We'll install cameras in your workshop, hidden in the overhead lights and ventilation system. Your phone will be equipped with tracking and recording software, and you'll carry this. He slid a small device across the table. It looked exactly like a car key fob, black plastic with a single button. Panic button, Pierce explained. 1 press and we'll have a team at your location in under 3 minutes. Keep it with you at all times, in your pocket, in your purse, wherever, but always within reach. And if Hayes contacts me, what am I supposed to do? Try to keep him talking, Brennan said. Don't act suspicious. Don't ask obvious questions. Just engage him naturally, the way you did before. If he asks for technical help, provide it, but try to get details. Where he is, what he's planning, who he's working with. You want me to lie to him? We want you to help us save his life, Brennan said firmly. Because if Hayes takes another shot, especially at the target we think he's planning, he won't walk away from it. Best case, he spends the rest of his life in military prison. Worst case, He doesn't survive the operation at all. I picked up the panic button, feeling its weight in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. Who is his target? You said someone is ultimately responsible for the intelligence failures that got Finn Gallagher killed. Who? Pierce and Brennan exchanged another one of those loaded glances. Finally, Pierce spoke. Colonel Vincent Hargrove. He was the senior intelligence officer who coordinated the information for that convoy operation. The faulty intel came through his office. When the investigation happened after the ambush, they found errors, gaps in verification, failures in communication. But Hargrove covered his tracks. He falsified some reports, redirected blame to lower-level analysts who'd made honest mistakes. The Army wanted to avoid embarrassing questions about systemic failures, so they quietly reassigned Hargrove to a desk job at the Pentagon. No court-martial, no public reprimand, just a transfer and a memo in his file. 8 soldiers died and he got a desk job, I said flatly. The Army's procedures had broken down, Brennan acknowledged, and I could hear the anger in his voice despite his controlled tone. I didn't agree with that decision. A lot of people didn't, but it wasn't our call to make. And now Hayes is going to make his own call. That's what we're afraid of. I looked at the photograph of Beckett Hayes still displayed on Pierce's laptop. Those distant eyes, that expression of someone looking at something far away. I thought about Finn Gallagher's bright smile in the photo, a young man who'd never make it to his October wedding. I thought about the fiancée he'd left behind, waiting for answers that would never come. And I thought about Hayes, carrying all that grief and rage, planning an impossible shot to make someone pay. When do we start? I asked. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a strange performance. I went to work every day at my usual time, maintaining weapons with my usual precision, speaking to soldiers with my usual, quiet professionalism. But everything was different now. Everything was watched. The cameras were invisible, just as Pierce had promised. I only knew where they were because he'd shown me on a diagram before they were installed. One in the overhead fluorescent fixture above my main workbench, one in the ventilation grate near the door, one embedded in the emergency exit sign. They captured every angle of my workshop, every person who entered, every conversation I had. My phone felt different too, even though it looked exactly the same. Knowing that every call, every text, every GPS coordinate was being monitored made me hyper-aware of it. I found myself leaving it on my workbench more often, face up, as if demonstrating that I had nothing to hide. The panic button stayed in my right cargo pocket, always. I touched it compulsively throughout the day, making sure it was still there. At night, I kept it on my nightstand, within arm's reach. 2 CID agents took turns sitting in an unmarked vehicle across from my apartment building. I'd see them when I left in the morning, still there when I came home at night. Sometimes they'd change shifts while I watched. One agent getting out, another getting in, a brief conversation through the window, then the first agent driving away in a different vehicle. They never acknowledged me. I never acknowledged them. We all pretended this was normal. The waiting was exhausting. I found myself analyzing every person who entered my workshop, wondering if they might be Hayes in disguise. The tall sergeant who brought in an M4 with a stuck charging handle. Could that be him? The young private who needed a scope adjustment. Was he watching me too carefully? Every unexpected sound made me tense. Every shadow at the edge of my vision made me turn my head. I had trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake in my apartment, wondering if Hayes was out there somewhere, planning his next move. Wondering if he knew I was bait. Wondering what I would say if he did make contact. On the 4th day, I started researching on my own. Pierce had given me limited access to the case files, the unclassified portions, but I wanted to understand more. I went back to the base library and pulled every file I could find on the Afghanistan ambush. After-action reports, intelligence assessments, witness statements from survivors. The picture that emerged was devastating. The convoy had been en route to deliver supplies to a forward operating base. Standard mission, routine route, supposedly cleared by intelligence. But the intelligence had been wrong. The insurgent group had moved into the area 2 days before, setting up a perfect ambush position in a narrow valley where the convoy would have no room to maneuver. When the attack came, it was overwhelming. RPGs disabled the lead and rear vehicles, trapping the convoy. Small arms fire poured in from elevated positions on both sides. The soldiers fought back valiantly, but they were pinned down, taking casualties. Hayes and Gallagher had been on an overwatch position, a hilltop about 800 meters away. The witness statements described how Hayes had systematically eliminated enemy fighters, his shots precise even under pressure. He'd taken out 6 confirmed targets in the first 3 minutes, creating enough breathing room for the convoy to begin maneuvering. But then a mortar round had landed near their position. The report described Gallagher taking shrapnel to the femoral artery, massive bleeding. Hayes had tried to apply a tourniquet, had called for medevac, had done everything right, but the medevac couldn't get to them fast enough. The landing zone was too hot. By the time they were evacuated, Gallagher had already lost too much blood. One witness statement from a staff sergeant named Kyle Morrison, who'd been in the convoy, included a detail that made me stop reading. He described seeing Hayes afterward, sitting outside the medical tent with Gallagher's blood still on his hands, staring at nothing. He looked like something had broken inside him, Morrison wrote, like part of him had died on that hilltop too. I understood that kind of loss. I knew what it felt like to have someone ripped away with no chance to say goodbye. That helpless rage when you can't change what happened. On the 7th day, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I looked up Finn Gallagher's family. It wasn't hard. A simple internet search gave me the basics. Parents still living in Ohio, one sister Lydia living in North Carolina, and a fiancée, Claire Ashford, who'd been planning an October wedding that would never happen. Claire had a social media profile that she hadn't updated in months. The last post was from a year ago, a photo of her and Finn together, both smiling. The caption read, "Can't wait to marry this man in October. Love you forever, my soldier." The comments below were heartbreaking. Friends offering condolences, sharing memories, telling Claire how sorry they were. She hadn't responded to any of them. I shouldn't have looked. It made everything too real, too personal, but I couldn't stop myself from scrolling through the photos, seeing Finn alive and happy, seeing the future he'd been planning that had been ripped away. There was one photo of Finn and Hayes together, both of them in desert fatigues, both looking exhausted but grinning at the camera. Someone had tagged it, "The dynamic duo, best sniper team in the regiment." Hayes had his arm around Finn's shoulders. They looked like brothers. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my apartment, thinking about bonds forged in combat, about the kind of trust it took to be someone's spotter, to literally watch their back while they focused through a scope. And I thought about what it would do to someone to lose that person, that brother, because of someone else's mistake. On the 10th day, I made another decision I probably shouldn't have made. I asked Pierce for more information about Colonel Hargrove. "Why?" Pierce asked, his voice careful over the phone. "Because if Hayes is planning to target him, I need to understand why. I need to understand what Hargrove did, not just what the reports say, but what actually happened." There was a long pause. "That's not your concern, Ms. Whitaker. Your job is to maintain your routine and alert us if Hayes makes contact." "My job is to help you save Hayes's life," I countered. "You said that yourself. How am I supposed to talk him down if I don't understand what he's fighting against?" Another pause. Then, "I'll see what I can do." 2 days later, Pierce showed up at my apartment with a thick file folder. He sat at my kitchen table and opened it carefully. "This doesn't leave this room," he said, "and officially we never had this conversation." The file contained the full investigation into the Afghanistan ambush, not the sanitized version, but the real one, the one that showed exactly how badly Hargrove had failed. The intelligence report that cleared the convoy route had come from Hargrove's office. But when investigators dug deeper, They found that the source for that intelligence had been questionable at best. A local informant with a history of providing unreliable information. The analyst who'd initially flagged concerns about the source had been overruled by Hargrove, who wanted the convoy to proceed on schedule. The file contained details I hadn't seen before. Hargrove hadn't just overruled one analyst. He'd ignored warnings from 3 separate intelligence specialists. One had written, "High risk, recommend delay," in bold letters on the original assessment. Hargrove had deleted that notation before passing the report up the chain. When the ambush happened and soldiers died, Hargrove had immediately begun covering his tracks. He'd altered some of the original intelligence reports to make it look like the warnings had been less serious than they were. He'd redirected blame to a junior analyst who'd made a minor error in a different report. He'd written memos emphasizing the unpredictability of enemy movements, making it sound like the ambush had been impossible to foresee. The investigation had uncovered all of this, but quietly. The Army had decided that a public court-martial would raise too many embarrassing questions about intelligence procedures and oversight. Better to handle it internally. Better to reassign Hargrove and implement some new protocols and move on. 8 soldiers dead, and the most senior person responsible had gotten a desk job. I looked up at Pierce. "This is what Hayes knows?" "We think so. He had friends in the unit who were part of the investigation. He would have heard things. So he's not wrong. Hargrove did get those soldiers killed. Hargrove did cover it up. And Hargrove did get away with it. Hayes isn't wrong about what happened," Pierce said carefully. "But he's wrong if he thinks killing Hargrove will fix anything. It won't bring Gallagher back. It won't change the system. It'll just destroy Hayes's life and make him a murderer. Even if the person he kills deserves it?" Pierce closed the file folder. "That's not for him to decide. That's not for any of us to decide. We have laws, we have military justice, we have procedures. They failed in this case, yes, but the answer isn't vigilante justice." "Then what is the answer?" "I don't know," Pierce admitted, "but I know it's not Hayes throwing his life away on revenge." On the 14th day, everything changed. I was working on a particularly stubborn bolt assembly when I noticed a shadow fall across my workbench. I looked up, expecting another soldier with another weapon problem. Instead, I saw a young woman I'd never seen before. She was probably in her mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a braid. She wore jeans and a plain green jacket, civilian clothes that made her stand out among the soldiers who usually populated the base. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her appearance, but her eyes were sharp and observant, taking in every detail of my workshop with an intensity that made me immediately alert. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. My hand moved subtly toward my right cargo pocket, where the panic button waited. "I hope so," she said. She had a slight accent, Eastern European maybe, though I couldn't place it exactly. "I'm looking for someone who really understands firearms, not just basic maintenance, but someone who knows the science behind long-range accuracy." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. This was exactly the kind of approach Pierce and Brennan had warned me about. I kept my hand near the panic button, but didn't press it yet. Not yet. I needed information first. "I do precision work," I said carefully. "What exactly do you need?" The woman pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket and placed it on my workbench. I unfolded it slowly, my heart rate increasing. It was a detailed technical specification for a Macmillan TAC-50 rifle, complete with calculations for bullet drop and wind drift at extreme ranges. The numbers went up to 4,000 meters. 4,000 meters. 200 meters farther than the shot in Syria. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "From someone who needs help," the woman said. Her eyes never left my face. "Someone who wants to know if these calculations are correct." My fingers found the panic button in my pocket. I pressed it once, hard, feeling the slight click that meant the signal had been sent. Somewhere in an office building across the base, alarms would be going off. Brennan's team would be mobilizing. 3 minutes, Pierce had said. I just needed to keep this woman talking for 3 minutes. Who is this person? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I think you know who he is. The woman's expression didn't change. He said there's a technician on this base who would understand what these numbers mean. He said she's the best at what she does. He said you were helpful once before and didn't ask too many questions. Beckett Hayes, I said quietly. The woman didn't confirm or deny the name, but her expression shifted slightly. A micro-expression of acknowledgement. He needs to know if a shot at this distance is possible, she continued. He needs someone to check his work before he attempts it. I looked down at the calculations again. They were incredibly detailed, accounting for variables most shooters never even considered. The Magnus effect on spinning bullets, atmospheric pressure changes at high altitude, even the phase of the moon and how it might affect visibility through a scope. This was the work of someone obsessed with perfection, someone who couldn't afford to miss. These calculations are mostly correct, I said slowly, stalling for time. How long had it been? 30 seconds? A minute? But there are a few adjustments needed. The Coriolis effect calculation is slightly off. At this latitude, you need to account for an additional 6 inches of drift. The woman listened intently, and I noticed something. Her right hand was in her jacket pocket, and from the way the fabric hung, there was something heavy in there. A weapon, probably. Can you write down the corrections? She asked. I picked up a pen from my workbench, but instead of writing, I pressed. These calculations, they're for a specific target, aren't they? Not just theoretical. Does that matter? It matters if someone's planning to break the law. I fix guns, but I don't help people commit crimes. The woman's expression hardened. What he's planning isn't a crime, it's justice. The man he's targeting is responsible for the deaths of innocent people. Your government knows about him, but won't act because of politics and diplomacy. So someone has to. By making a shot from 4,000 meters? I kept my voice skeptical, buying time. That's impossible. Even with perfect conditions, the variables are too many. The bullet would be in the air for over 10 seconds. Anything could happen. Not impossible, the woman said. Difficult, yes, but not impossible for someone with his skill. He's already proven he can make shots that others think are impossible. I heard it then. Footsteps outside my workshop. Heavy boots moving fast, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. The woman heard them too. Her hand tightened around whatever was in her pocket. You signaled them, she said, her voice cold now. He said you might, but I hoped you wouldn't. I don't help people hurt others, I said, no matter how justified they think they are. The woman backed toward the door, pulling a handgun from her pocket. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not show fear. She wasn't pointing the gun at me, just holding it ready. Tell them this, she said. Beckett Hayes is not a criminal. He's a soldier who was failed by the system he served. He watched his best friend die because someone made mistakes and nobody was held accountable. He spent months tracking down the people responsible, and he stopped them from killing more Americans. Your people should be thanking him, not hunting him. Then let him come in, I said. Let him tell his story officially. Captain Brennan promised he'd get a fair hearing. The woman laughed, but there was no humor in it. A fair hearing? They'll lock him up and throw away the key for disobeying orders. Number Beckett has one more thing he needs to do. One more person who needs to answer for what happened to Finn. After that, maybe he'll turn himself in. But not before. The workshop door burst open. Captain Brennan rushed in with 2 CID agents, weapons drawn. The woman spun toward them, and for one terrible moment, I thought there would be shooting. Thought I was about to watch someone die in my workshop. But the woman was faster than they expected. She threw something at the agents, a small canister that exploded in a thick cloud of gray smoke. By the time the smoke began to clear, she was gone. Brennan ran after her. I heard boots pounding on pavement outside, shouts, the roar of an engine. Then Brennan came back 5 minutes later, breathing hard and angry. Motorcycle, he said. Had it waiting 2 blocks away. Lost her in traffic before we could get a vehicle in position. Agent Pierce arrived 10 minutes later with a forensics team. They processed my workshop carefully, photographing everything, collecting samples, dusting for fingerprints. I sat on my stool, still holding the paper with Hayes's calculations, while agents moved around me like I was furniture. "Are you okay?" Brennan asked, sitting down across from me. "Did she threaten you?" "Not directly. She had a gun, but she never pointed it at me. She just wanted me to check the calculations." "What did she say?" "Every detail, everything you can remember." I repeated the conversation word for word, watching as both Brennan and Pierce's expressions grew increasingly grave. 4,000 meters, Brennan said when I finished. "He's planning another shot, even longer than the last one." "Who could he be targeting?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Pierce pulled out his phone and started making calls. I heard fragments of his conversation. "Escalate to highest priority. Potential threat to high-value target. Needs satellite surveillance." When he hung up, Pierce looked at me seriously. "The woman mentioned someone who should be held accountable for what happened to Hayes's friend. We've been investigating that ambush for months. There were several people in the intelligence chain who handled the information. Most of them were lower-level analysts who made honest mistakes. But there was one person." "Colonel Hargrove," I said. Pierce nodded. "He was quietly reassigned to a desk job. No court-martial, no public reprimand. The Army wanted to keep it quiet to avoid embarrassing questions about how our intelligence system could fail so badly." Brennan's jaw was tight with anger. "I didn't agree with that decision. A lot of us didn't, but it wasn't our call to make." "Where is Hargrove now?" I asked. Pierce and Brennan exchanged a look. "He's attending a NATO military conference in Bavaria, Germany. There are going to be several high-ranking officers there. Lots of security. It's the kind of event where you'd think someone would be completely safe. Unless someone was willing to take a shot from 4,000 meters away," I said quietly. "From a distance where security wouldn't even think to look." Brennan stood up abruptly. "We need to contact the conference organizers immediately. Increase security. Move Hargrove if necessary. If Hayes is planning what we think he's planning, we need to stop him before he destroys his life." I looked down at the calculations again, studying the numbers with my professional eye. "There's something else," I said. "These calculations aren't just theoretical. Hayes has already found his position. He knows exactly where he's going to take the shot from. These numbers are specific to terrain, to elevation, to the exact distance and angle. He's not planning anymore. He's ready." Pierce came back over to the table. "What makes you say that?" I pointed to specific notations on the paper. "See these adjustments for altitude? They're calculated for approximately 800 meters of elevation gain. And these wind patterns, they're specific to mountain terrain, not desert or plains. He's scouted the location. He's probably already there, waiting." Brennan looked at Pierce. "We need to move now. If she's right, we might already be too late." "How long until the conference?" I asked. "It starts in 48 hours, Pierce said. "Hargrove gives his presentation on intelligence coordination in 2 days." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Vincent Hargrove, the man whose intelligence failures had gotten 8 soldiers killed, was going to give a presentation on intelligence coordination. While somewhere in the Bavarian mountains, Beckett Hayes was setting up for an impossible shot that would make Hargrove answer for those failures in the most permanent way possible. Pierce started making more calls, his voice urgent. Brennan turned to me. "You did well today, Joe. Kept her talking, got information, stayed calm under pressure. She's going to tell Hayes that I signaled you, that I helped you." "Probably," Brennan acknowledged. "So he'll know I'm not on his side." "Were you ever on his side?" I thought about that question. Was I on Hayes's side? I understood his pain, his anger, his need for justice. I'd seen the evidence of Hargrove's failures and cover-ups, knew that 8 soldiers had died because someone had been more concerned with career advancement than with verifying intelligence. But I also knew that revenge wasn't justice, that Hayes making this shot wouldn't bring Finn back, wouldn't fix the system, wouldn't make anything better. It would just destroy Hayes's life and make him exactly what the Army would label him: a rogue operator, a vigilante, a murderer. I'm on the side of stopping him from making a mistake he can't take back, I said finally. Brennan nodded. Then you need to come with us to Germany. If anyone can talk Hayes down, it's you. I stared at him. Me? I'm a firearms technician. I'm not a negotiator. You're the person Hayes trusted once, Brennan said. You're the person who understands both the technical possibility of his shot and the emotional impossibility of what he's trying to do. You've read the files. You know Finn's story. You understand why Hayes is doing this. That makes you more qualified than any hostage negotiator we could bring. Pierce came back over, still on his phone. He covered the mouthpiece. We can have you on a transport to Germany in 6 hours. German police are already coordinating with our people on the ground. We've identified the most likely observation tower based on the calculations you analyzed. If Hayes is there, we'll find him. And then what? I asked. Then you talk to him, Brennan said. You remind him that Finn Gallagher wouldn't want this, that there's a better way to get justice, that he doesn't have to throw his life away. I looked down at the calculations one more time. 4,000 meters, an impossible distance. A shot that would take over 10 seconds from trigger pull to impact. A shot that required perfect conditions, perfect equipment, and a shooter with nothing left to lose. Okay, I said, I'll go. The flight to Germany took 14 hours with a brief stopover at a military base in Britain. I spent most of the journey reviewing files on Beckett Hayes, studying his service record, his marksmanship scores, the after-action reports from every operation he'd been part of. The more I read, the more I understood the depth of his loss and the intensity of his anger. There were performance evaluations from his commanding officers. Sergeant Hayes demonstrates exceptional skill and composure under pressure. Hayes's ability to make difficult shots in adverse conditions is unmatched in the regiment. Recommend Hayes for advanced sniper instructor training. There were photographs from his deployments. Hayes in desert camouflage, scanning terrain through binoculars. Hayes cleaning his rifle in a forward operating base. Hayes and Finn Gallagher standing together, both exhausted but grinning. That photo I'd seen before on Claire Ashford's social media. And there were the witness statements from the ambush, the ones I'd read before, but which hit differently now. Staff Sergeant Morrison describing Hayes sitting outside the medical tent with Gallagher's blood still on his hands. A medic describing how Hayes had tried desperately to save Gallagher, applying the tourniquet correctly, doing everything by the book, but the injury had been too severe and help had arrived too late. One statement from Hayes's team leader included a detail that made me pause. After we extracted from the ambush site, Sergeant Hayes requested permission to view Corporal Gallagher's body one final time. He spent approximately 10 minutes alone with him. When he emerged, I asked if he was okay. Hayes said, "I made him a promise, sir. I'm going to keep it." I didn't know what he meant at the time. Now I wish I'd asked. What promise had Hayes made to his dying friend? To find the people responsible? To make sure someone answered for the intelligence failure? To ensure that Gallagher's death meant something? Captain Brennan sat across from me on the transport plane, also reviewing files. He looked up and caught my eye. "You should know something," he said. "Colonel Hargrove, the officer Hayes is targeting. I knew him years ago, before he became the person he is now. He used to be a good officer, someone who cared about his soldiers, but he got political, started worrying more about his career than about doing the right thing. When that ambush happened, Hargrove was the senior intelligence officer who should have caught the errors. Instead, he covered them up to protect himself." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Because I want you to understand that Hayes isn't wrong about Hargrove. The man does deserve to be held accountable. But killing him isn't justice. It's murder. And it will destroy everything Hayes has accomplished in his career. Everything Finn Gallagher believed about him. I don't want to see that happen. We landed at a military airfield outside Munich in the early morning. The air was cold and thin, reminding me immediately that we were at altitude. A convoy of vehicles was waiting, including German police and additional CID agents. Agent Pierce was already there, having flown in on an earlier flight. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We've located the observation tower Miss Whitaker identified from the calculations," Pierce said as we climbed into a command vehicle. "German police have set up a perimeter at the base of the mountain, but they haven't approached the tower yet. We wanted to wait until you arrived." "Has anyone seen Hayes?" Brennan asked. "No visual confirmation, but there's definitely someone up there. We've picked up heat signatures from the tower, and there's been some movement at the windows. Whoever it is, they're in position and waiting." The conference was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. I watched through the window as the conference center below grew smaller, becoming a toy building in a valley surrounded by peaks. I pulled out my phone and opened the ballistics calculator I'd been using, inputting new numbers. Distance from the tower to the conference center, approximately 3,950 meters. Elevation gain, roughly 800 meters. Wind speed at altitude, harder to predict, but the calculations Hayes had given to that woman suggested he'd been monitoring weather patterns for weeks. If conditions were right, if the wind was calm, if Hayes had done his homework correctly, he might actually make this shot. The thought terrified me. We stopped about a kilometer from the tower. German police had established a checkpoint here, and beyond it the road was blocked. Brennan, Pierce, and I got out along with several other agents. The morning air bit through my jacket. I wasn't dressed for this, wasn't trained for this kind of field work. Brennan noticed me shivering and handed me a tactical jacket. "Put this on. It's going to get colder before it gets warmer." We hiked the last kilometer on foot, staying low and using the terrain for cover. I struggled to keep up, my breath coming hard in the thin air, my legs burning from the climb. Brennan slowed his pace to match mine, staying close. When we reached a position about 200 meters from the tower, we stopped. The observation tower was old, built sometime in the early 20th century from stone and weathered timber. It had a circular observation deck at the top, with windows that looked out over the valley. Through binoculars, I could see movement in those windows, a shadow shifting, the glint of something metallic catching the sun. Pierce pulled out a radio with a powerful speaker. He looked at Brennan, who nodded, then raised the radio and called up to the tower. His voice echoed across the mountainside. "Beckett Hayes, this is Agent Graham Pierce with Army CID. We know you're up there. We know what you're planning. We need to talk to you." For a long moment, there was no response, just the wind moving through the pine trees and the distant sound of helicopters from the valley below. Then a voice came back, distorted by distance, but clear enough to understand. "There's nothing to talk about, Agent Pierce. You know what Hargrove did. You know he got Finn and 7 other soldiers killed. You know he faced no real consequences. Someone has to make this right." The voice was controlled, professional, but I could hear the pain underneath it. This was a man who'd been living with grief and rage for a year, who'd spent months planning this moment, who believed with absolute certainty that what he was doing was necessary. Brennan took the radio. "Hayes, this is Captain Cole Brennan, Special Operations. I understand your anger. I understand why you're doing this, but killing Hargrove won't bring Finn back. It won't fix what's broken in the system. All it will do is destroy your life and your career." Hayes's laugh was bitter, carried across the distance by the mountain air. "My career? My career ended the day I watched my best friend bleed out in the desert because of bad intelligence. Finn was going to get married when he got home. Did you know that, Captain? He had a fiancée waiting for him, Claire. She still sends me messages sometimes, asking if I know why he died. What am I supposed to tell her? That the Army made a mistake and nobody cared enough to fix it? I found myself reaching for the radio. Brennan looked surprised but handed it to me. "Sergeant Hayes," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "My name is Josephine Whitaker. I'm the firearms technician from Fort Campbell. We spoke once about cold bore shots and wind calculations." There was a pause. When Hayes spoke again, I heard surprise in his voice. "Miss Whitaker? What are you doing here?" "I came to talk you out of the worst decision of your life. With respect, you don't understand what I'm doing." "I understand exactly what you're doing," I said. "You're planning to take a 4,000-meter shot to prove that Hargrove can't hide from consequences. You're using Finn's death to justify revenge, and you're throwing away everything Finn valued about you." Another pause, longer this time. I pressed on. "I've read Finn's letters, Beckett. I've seen the photographs. I know he was planning to take you fishing when he got home. I know he wanted you as his best man at the wedding. I know he wrote to his sister that you were like his brother. You've read Finn's letters?" Hayes's voice was quieter now, uncertain. "Every one that Agent Pierce could find. I've also read the after-action reports from the ambush. I know what happened. I know about the faulty intelligence. I know about Hargrove's cover-up. I know why you're angry." I took a breath, thinking about my own parents, about sudden loss, about the futile rage that comes when someone is ripped away without warning. "I lost my parents when I was 23, Beckett. Car accident. One moment they were alive, the next they were gone. For months afterward, I wanted someone to blame. The other driver, the road engineer, anyone. But blame didn't bring them back. Revenge wouldn't have either." "This is different," Hayes said. "Hargrove made choices. He prioritized his career over soldiers' lives. He covered up his mistakes and let good people die." "You're right. Hargrove made terrible choices. He does deserve to be held accountable, but not like this. Not with you throwing your life away." "What other way is there? The system already had its chance. They investigated, they found the truth, and they did nothing. They gave him a desk job and a quiet reassignment. That's not justice." A crack split the air. Not a gunshot, lightning. Dark clouds had rolled in from the west, and the first drops of cold rain began to fall. Pierce cursed, checking his phone's weather radar. "Storm front moving in faster than predicted," he muttered to Brennan. "Wind's going to pick up to 15, 20 miles per hour in the next 10 minutes. If Hayes is going to take that shot, he has a narrowing window." My pulse spiked. The calculations I'd seen assumed calm conditions. If the wind changed, Hayes would need to recalibrate on the fly. But more importantly, if he thought his opportunity was closing, he might act impulsively. I grabbed the radio back. "Beckett, listen to me. I'll make sure Hargrove faces real accountability, not with a rifle, with testimony, with evidence, with public pressure. Captain Brennan has agreed to reopen the investigation into Finn's death. I'll personally review every intelligence report from that operation. I'll find every error, every cover-up, every place where Hargrove failed, and I'll make sure it goes public." "Words," Hayes said. "Just more words and promises. I've heard them before." "I'm not making empty promises, Beckett. I'm telling you what I'm going to do whether you come down from that tower or not. But I can only do it if you're alive and free to testify. I need you as a witness. Finn needs you as a witness." The radio was silent for a long time. Rain was falling harder now, and I could see Brennan and Pierce watching me, wondering if I was getting through, wondering if words could compete with months of grief and rage. "The shot I'm planning," Hayes finally said, "the calculations I gave to Lydia to check. Do you think I could make it?" I thought about lying, about telling him it was impossible. But Hayes was too smart for that, too knowledgeable about ballistics. He'd know I was patronizing him. "Honestly, I think you might. The conditions today were nearly perfect before this storm rolled in. Light wind, clear visibility, stable temperature. You've done your homework. The calculations were excellent. Just needed minor adjustments for the Coriolis effect at this latitude.
You might actually make this shot.
Then why are you trying to stop me? Because making this shot isn't the point anymore, is it? You've already proven you can do the impossible. You did it in Syria. You eliminated the arms dealer from 3,800 meters. You've already shown that you're the most skilled marksman alive. You don't need to prove it again. Syria wasn't about proving anything. It was about justice.
And this?
What's this about really? Is it about justice for Finn? Or is it about your pain? About the fact that you've been carrying this grief for a year and you don't know how else to let it go. The silence that followed was different. Not angry or defiant, but thoughtful, maybe even vulnerable. When Finn died, I swore on his blood that his death would mean something, Hayes said, voice breaking, that someone would finally pay attention, that the system would change. How else could I keep that oath? You kept it in Syria, I said gently. You tracked down the arms dealer who supplied the insurgents. You stopped him from killing more Americans. You made Finn's death mean something. That oath is already fulfilled, Beckett. Hargrove is still free, still unpunished. For now, but that can change. Let me help you change it the right way. Come down from that tower. Let's do this together. I heard something in the background on Hayes's end, a metallic sound, like a rifle being set down. Hope flared in my chest. How do I know this isn't just a trick? Hayes asked. How do I know you won't just arrest me and lock me away? Brennan took the radio back. Hayes, this is Brennan again. I give you my word as an officer that if you come down peacefully, you'll get a fair hearing. Yes, you'll face charges for desertion and going AWOL, but we'll make sure your testimony about the intelligence failures is heard. We'll make sure Finn's story is told. Your word as an officer, Hayes repeated. The same officers who let Hargrove walk away with a desk job? I'm not those officers, Brennan said firmly. I didn't agree with that decision then, and I don't agree with it now. Give me a chance to prove that some of us still care about doing the right thing. More silence. The rain was falling steadily now, and I could feel everyone around me holding their breath, waiting to see if words had been enough. I want Ms. Whitaker's word too, Hayes finally said. I want her promise that she'll follow through, that she'll review those intelligence reports and make sure the truth comes out. I took the radio again. You have my word, Beckett. I'll make sure the truth about Finn's death and Hargrove's failures becomes public. I'll make sure Finn's sacrifice meant something, but I need you alive to help me do it. The tower door opened. Beckett Hayes emerged slowly, his hands raised above his head. He was wearing civilian hiking clothes, not a uniform. A Barrett M82 rifle was slung over his shoulder, pointing safely downward. He descended the stone steps carefully, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. German police and CID agents moved forward cautiously, weapons drawn but not aimed. Hayes reached the bottom of the tower and stopped, then slowly unslung the rifle and set it on the ground. He knelt, placing his hands behind his head in the standard arrest position. It was the first time I'd seen him in person, rather than in photographs. He looked older than 28, aged by grief and months on the run. His face was weathered and thin, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. But as the agents approached to handcuff him, I saw something else in his expression. Relief. As if some terrible weight had finally been lifted. As they led him past our position, Hayes looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and I saw tears running down his face, mixing with the rain. Thank you, he said quietly, for understanding, for remembering Finn. Finn would be proud you chose life, I replied. Hayes nodded, then allowed himself to be led away toward the waiting vehicles. Pierce and Brennan stood with me as we watched the arrest. Around us, German police were processing the scene, photographing Hayes's setup, collecting evidence. I saw them bring out the rifle, the scope still mounted, along with a ballistics notebook filled with calculations and weather observations. There was also a small makeshift altar, a photograph of Finn Gallagher propped against a stone, his dog tags hanging from a nail, and what looked like a wedding invitation with an October date that had never come. "You did well, Joe," Brennan said. "You may have just saved his life." "We'll see," I said. "Now comes the hard part, making sure my promises mean something." 3 months later, I sat in the back of a military courtroom at Fort Bragg, watching Beckett Hayes face court-martial. He wore his dress uniform, standing straight and accepting responsibility for his actions. The charges were serious: desertion, unauthorized absence, possession of military property without authorization. The prosecution had initially wanted to charge him with attempted murder, but that charge had been dropped when it became clear he'd surrendered before taking any shot. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the back and taking notes. Witnesses were called, including soldiers from Hayes's unit, who spoke about his character and his relationship with Finn Gallagher. Claire Ashford testified tearfully about her fiancé and about how Hayes had been like a brother to Finn. After Claire's testimony, I caught up with her outside the courtroom. She looked exhausted, older than her 24 years. "He would have been 24 next month," Claire said softly, not looking at me. "We'd planned to buy a house in Colorado. He wanted to teach kids to fish." She finally turned, and I saw she'd been crying. "Thank you for what you did in Germany. Beckett wrote to me from the brig. He said you reminded him that Finn would want him to live, not to throw his life away on revenge." I just told him the truth he needed to hear. Claire's voice was steadier now. "I've been so angry for so long. Angry at the Army, at Hargrove, at God, at Finn for leaving me. But watching both Beckett and Hargrove face consequences, real consequences, it helped. It didn't bring Finn back, but it meant his death mattered. That the system finally listened." She paused, gathering herself. "I'm moving to Denver next month, starting over. Finn would want that too." Finn's sister Lydia, the woman who'd come to my workshop with the calculations, also testified about her family's loss and about why she'd helped Hayes. After Lydia's testimony, I caught up with her outside the courtroom. She looked exhausted, older than her 26 years. "Thank you for not pressing charges against me," she said quietly. "The smoke grenade, helping Beckett evade. You were helping your brother's best friend seek justice," I said. "I understood that, even if I couldn't condone it." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "Finn would have wanted Beckett to live, to move on. You gave him that chance." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Lydia pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. Finn, Hayes, and herself at a barbecue, all three laughing. This was 2 weeks before his last deployment. "Beckett promised Finn he'd look after me if anything happened." She wiped her eyes. "Instead, I ended up trying to look after him. I'm glad you succeeded where I failed." I never saw Lydia again after the trial, but I heard she moved back to Ohio to be closer to her parents. Some wounds need family to heal. I testified too, describing Hayes's technical expertise, his careful planning, and the conversation at the observation tower. I tried to convey not just the facts, but the pain and loss that had driven him to such extremes. The prosecution painted Hayes as a dangerous vigilante who'd gone rogue. The defense portrayed him as a dedicated soldier who'd been failed by his chain of command and driven to desperate measures by grief and anger. On the final day before sentencing, Hayes was given a chance to speak. He stood before the panel of officers, his voice steady and clear. "I take full responsibility for my actions. I deserted my post. I went AWOL for months. I planned to kill a man, and I would have done it if Miss Whitaker hadn't convinced me there was a better way. I don't deny any of that." He paused, gathering himself. "But I want this court to understand why I did it. Finn Gallagher was my brother in every way that mattered. We trusted each other with our lives every single day. When he died because of someone else's mistakes that were then covered up to protect careers, something broke inside me. I couldn't accept that his death meant nothing. I couldn't accept that nobody would be held accountable." Hayes looked directly at the panel members. "What I did was wrong. I understand that now. But I hope this court will also acknowledge that what was done to Finn Gallagher and the 7 other soldiers who died that day was also wrong. They deserve better from the army they served. Their families deserve better. And if my actions, if this trial, if any of this leads to real accountability and real change, then maybe some good can come from it. I'm prepared to accept whatever punishment this court decides is appropriate, but I will never apologize for caring about my friend, for demanding justice for him, or for believing that the Army should protect its soldiers better than it did. The panel deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, they announced their sentence: 5 years in military prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Dishonorable discharge from the Army. Loss of all military benefits and rank. It was harsh, but it could have been worse. The prosecution had asked for 10 years. I saw relief flash across Hayes's face before he composed himself again. But the court-martial wasn't the only thing happening during those 3 months. True to my word, I'd spent weeks reviewing the intelligence reports from the Afghanistan ambush. With Brennan's help and official authorization, I'd gotten access to the full, unredacted files. What I found was damning. Colonel Hargrove hadn't just made mistakes, he'd been repeatedly warned about the questionable nature of the intelligence source. Multiple analysts had flagged concerns. Hargrove had overruled them all, prioritizing the convoy schedule over verification procedures. And then, when soldiers died, he'd systematically covered his tracks. I compiled everything into a detailed report. Every warning that had been ignored, every report that had been altered, every piece of evidence that showed Hargrove had chosen his career over his soldiers' lives. I submitted it through official channels, but I also made sure copies went to several investigative journalists who specialized in military affairs. The story broke 2 weeks into Hayes's trial. Major publications ran detailed exposés on the intelligence failures that led to the Afghanistan ambush. Hargrove's name was front and center. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Within a month, Hargrove faced his own court-martial. This time, there was no quiet reassignment. The charges included falsifying intelligence reports, dereliction of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The trial was public, covered extensively by the media. I testified at Hargrove's court-martial too. I walked the panel through the intelligence reports, showing exactly how Hargrove had failed and then covered up those failures. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, speaking in that formal courtroom, knowing that my words were helping to destroy a man's career. But every time I wavered, I thought about Finn Gallagher's bright smile in those photographs, about the October wedding that never happened, about 8 soldiers who died because someone had prioritized politics over verification. Hargrove was found guilty on all charges. He was stripped of his rank, given a dishonorable discharge, and sentenced to 2 years in military prison. It wasn't the same punishment Hayes had wanted to deliver with a rifle, but it was accountability. Military justice had finally worked, even if it had taken extraordinary circumstances to make it happen. 6 months after Hayes's sentencing, I stood at Finn Gallagher's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. It was a beautiful spring day, warm and clear, with cherry blossoms blooming across the cemetery grounds. I placed flowers on the grave, white roses, and stood there quietly. I wasn't alone. Claire Ashford was there too, placing white lilies on the grave, Finn's favorite, she told me. We stood together in shared silence, 2 women who'd loved the men that ambush had destroyed in different ways. Then Claire walked away, and I was alone with Finn's grave and the cherry blossoms falling like snow. My phone rang as I was leaving the cemetery. It was Brennan. "New case needs your expertise, Joe. Impossible ballistic scenario. Are you available?" I looked back one last time at Finn's headstone, at the white roses I'd left, at the endless rows of markers stretching across Arlington's green hills. Each one a story, each one a sacrifice, each one a reminder of what happened when the system failed and people like Hayes tried to fix it alone. "Send me the details, Captain," I said. "I'll take a look." Because that was my job now. Not just fixing rifles, but fixing the system that put those rifles in soldiers' hands. Making sure intelligence was verified, making sure officers were held accountable, making sure the next Finn Gallagher had a better chance of coming home. After the trials, I'd accepted a permanent position as a CID technical consultant. I still maintain weapons at Fort Campbell, but I also consulted on complex cases involving firearms and ballistics. My expertise was valued in ways it had never been before. I was no longer invisible. As I drove away from Arlington, I thought about everything that had happened, about the question that had changed my life, about the impossible shot that was never taken, about a soldier who'd chosen life over revenge because someone had reminded him that his friend would want him to live. I thought about my promise to Hayes and how keeping that promise had led to real change. The Army had implemented new oversight procedures for intelligence operations, requiring mandatory third-party review of pre-mission intelligence. It was a small reform, but it was something. Finn Gallagher's death had finally led to changes that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. And I thought about Beckett Hayes, serving his sentence in military prison, but knowing that he'd helped expose the truth about Hargrove's failures. I'd received a letter from him a few weeks earlier, thanking me again for talking him down from that tower, for keeping my promises, for making sure Finn's story was told. "I'll be eligible for parole in 2.5 years," he'd written. "When I get out, I'm thinking about becoming a civilian marksmanship instructor, teaching the next generation of soldiers, making sure they understand that being a good shooter isn't just about making difficult shots. It's about making the right choices, even when they're hard, especially when they're hard." I think Finn would like that. I thought he was right. Finn would like that. For 7 years, I'd been invisible, fixing guns while others made history with them. Then Captain Brennan had asked me one question, and everything changed. I'd stepped out of the shadows and into something larger than myself. I'd helped save a soldier's life, helped expose corruption, helped make the system work the way it was supposed to. My life wasn't quiet anymore, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The road ahead stretched out before me, leading back to Fort Campbell, back to my workshop, back to new cases and new challenges. But I was different now. I'd learned that sometimes the most important shot is the one you convince someone not to take. That being invisible means you can see what others miss. And that sometimes the quiet technician in the corner is exactly who needs to speak up. I drove on thinking about impossible distances and the choices we make when faced with them, about grief and justice and the long, difficult path between the two. Behind me, Arlington's white headstones stood in perfect rows, each one a story, each one a sacrifice. Ahead of me, the future waited, full of questions I couldn't yet answer and challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I was truly ready.